Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Nir Yaniv. We'll be talking about his latest book, The Good Soldier, available now from Shadowpaw Press. Welcome to episode 152 of The Worldshapers. This is the podcast where I talk to authors about their books. There's lots of podcasts like that, but this is mine. And I am myself an author. My name is Edward Willett, as I guess I said off the top. And I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is Shadowpaw Press, and I have published quite a few books by other authors, and am continuing to publish many more going forward. And I will be talking to a lot of those authors on this podcast, including today. What's coming up from Shadowpaw Press? Well, The Good Soldier, which is the book we'll be talking with author Nir Yaniv about today, is coming out January 23rd, which is quite likely after you've seen this, unless you watched it just as soon as it went live. Also on January 23rd is Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. This is an anthology of science fiction and fantasy by authors who have been interviewed here on the Worldshapers. I've done 4 of those, and I'm hoping to kickstart a 5th one very soon, but number 4 comes out also on January 23rd, features authors like Sherilyn Kenyon and Jean-Louis Trudel, Michael Brent Collins, David Boop, a long list of award-winning and, in some cases, internationally best-selling authors. So please check that out. And then in about 3 weeks, on February 6th, maybe it's only a little over 2 weeks, I guess, The Headmasters, which is a YA science fiction dystopian novel by one of Canada's most beloved nonfiction writers, Mark Morton, will be coming out from Shadowpaw Press, and I'll be talking to Mark, actually, I think for the next episode, if I remember right. So we'll hear more about The Headmasters, as that one is called, in the next episode. But I'm already lining up authors who aren't Shadowpaw Press authors, and I will continue to talk to authors in a wide variety of genres as I continue in this slightly modified version of The Worldshapers as it moves through its 5th year. Hard to believe I've been doing it that long. Actually, we're well into the 6th year, I guess, is what's going on. It was the 5th anniversary was back in 2018. My first guest was Robert J. Sawyer, and of course, last week's episode featured Robert J. Sawyer. There's a lot of other great books coming out from Shadowpaw Press. Robert J. Sawyer's The Downloaded this summer, 2 books by Dave Duncan, the late, great Canadian science fiction fantasy author. I've also got a couple of books of poetry coming out this summer, and I'll have 3 middle grade books by Governor General's Award winner Arthur Slade, collectively called Canadian Chills, that I'm republishing. So it's going to be a busy summer here at Shadowpaw Press headquarters. And as for myself, I have a lot of projects I want to be writing on as well. So we'll see what happens. 2024 has just begun, but I'm hoping for a very productive year, and I hope to continue talking to lots of interesting authors right here on the Worldshapers. So let's get on to this episode's guest, Nir Yaniv. I am going to read his author bio from the back of The Good Soldier by way of introduction. Nir Yaniv is an Israeli-born multidisciplinary artist living in Los Angeles. He's an author, a musician, an illustrator, and a filmmaker. He founded Israel's first online science fiction magazine and served as its chief editor for 10 years, after which he moved on to editing a printed genre magazine. He collaborated with World Fantasy Award-winning author and former Worldshapers guest, and in fact there's a story by Lavie Tidhar in the new Shapers of Worlds Volume 4, on 2 novels, including the deranged sci-fi extravaganza, as the Jewish Quarterly called it, the Tel Aviv Dossier, and his English-language collection, The Love Machine Other Contraptions, was published by Infinity Plus in 2012. His most recent Hebrew novel, King of Jerusalem, was published in Israel in 2019, and his short stories have appeared in Weird Tales, Apex, and ChiZine, among many others. Nir's musical career includes soundtracks for film, dance shows, and theater, and his most recent work is the voice and drums animated album The Voice Remains, Life Art Music 2021. Nir has also directed several short films and music videos, both live action and animated. So, let's talk to Nir Yaniv. So Nir, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is fun. I mean, obviously we've been corresponding for quite a while since I'm publishing the book we'll be talking about today, The Good Soldier, but we haven't actually spoken in any fashion until just now or seen each other except in photographs. So it's nice to make your acquaintance face to face virtually. And you're in Los Angeles, right?
I'm in Los Angeles, yeah.
Nice for
Nice.
you. It's minus, well, yesterday it was minus 36 Celsius here with a minus 40 something wind chill. So,
I've actually never even saw snow falling in real life.
oh, well.
I'm a snow virgin.
I have seen a lot of it. It
Yeah.
wears off. The thrill wears off after a while
Yeah.
as you get
Not
older.
a lot of
Especially.
that in the Middle East.
Well, let's start with that. Let's start with a little bit of your biography and where you were born and grew up, and how did you get started writing, and specifically science fiction?
Well, I was born in Israel, and I grew up there, and I spent actually most of my life there. And I got into books at all at the moment I could. Um, and But I had no idea. Like, I'm the eldest brother, so I sort of didn't have anyone to guide me, and we kind of moved a lot when I was younger. And then we settled when I was 7. We settled in this small town near Haifa, at the north of Israel. And the first things my parents did was to get me a subscription to the local library. And then I would go there, but I had no idea what books to take, right? Because, how would you know? And I didn't know anyone, right? I didn't have any friends yet. Like, this was the summer break before second grade. So I found some, silly children adventure books, really nothing of high quality. And I would just bring one every day. Every time I go to the library, I bring one, and I read a lot. And then one day my dad caught me at the act. It was like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's a book, such and such." He's like, "Oh, are those the books you're reading?" And he took me immediately back to the library. And we got out of there with 2 books. One was, I don't know if you remember the old Hammerhand series.
The name is familiar. I don't think I ever read them.
Adventures for older kids, let's say. But the other one was Jules Verne.
Hmm.
The 5 weeks in a balloon. And that started me on Jules Verne, and then, the Travel to the Moon, all of that. And then very quickly I got into Heinlein, which is actually no reading material for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old or even 12-year-old, I think. But, if you think about it a little bit, like, as an adult, um, and to Asimov, and all of these, by the way, in Hebrew translations. I had no English in me. We started English in I would say 4th grade, and I hated it. I couldn't conceive why anyone would want to speak a different language. I mean, I know Hebrew, and that's it. That's it. I'm good. I'm better. I remember telling my parents at like the 4th grade, I was like, "Listen, I don't understand why I go to school. I know everything I need to know." And my dad said, "Okay, so are you ready to go to work?" And I was like, "Why? What?" So I stayed in school in order not to work. So anyway, that was my beginning with science fiction. And then this was in my 20s. I was already reading English, etc., etc. And there was some people founded the Israeli Society for Science Fiction and Fantasy. Among them were 2 translators whose names I knew from all those Hebrew science fiction books that I read as a child. Actually, one of them passed away a few days ago or a week ago. And he was really Israel's senior science fiction translator. He translated Dune, which, by the way, in itself, Dune is considered, the Hebrew translation of Dune is considered by Israeli science fiction fans to be better than the original. Because Frank Herbert knew many things. He was a great writer, but the one thing he did not know was Arabic. So all the Arabic is wrong in Dune. So the translator found like an Arabic expert in the university, and they went over the book, and term by term, they fixed it. But anyway, so that society came to be, and then they wanted to have a website, and I was like, I can create a website. A total lie, but I created a website, and that website soon became Israel's first online science fiction magazine, which I edited for 10 years. And sometime in the middle of all this, I was like, maybe I could also write something instead of just editing other people's work, which I did gleefully. And that, by the way, is how I met Lavie Tidhar, that you know.
Yes.
Lavie is, let's say, Lavie is a full-time writer, right? I'm just having fun. Lavie is making a living of writing, and our first virtual meeting was when he submitted the story to the magazine I was editing. And I edited the story, and I really edited the story. I mean, I removed a fifth of the story. And he never forgave me, and we became best friends.
Well,
and that's it. That's how I found, eventually I moved to LA, but this was relatively, this was 2017.
I was going to say, I edited something my wife wrote for a newsletter that I edited, and she never forgave me, but we ended up getting married. So
yeah, it's good to be the editor.
So your first ventures into writing, were they short fiction, or did you immediately plunge into writing longer things?
Oh, no. It took me many, many years to plunge into longer things. I mainly wrote short stories. At some point, I remember after 10 years of editing the online magazine, I got an offer to edit a printed magazine. So I moved to edit that. And then, Israel is not very big. And you're talking about the population now of Israel, including everyone, is like 9 million people. So there are more people in LA County, So one problem was getting enough good stories for the magazine that you edit, right? I mean, when you do it online, you don't mind much, right? It comes when it comes. And, meanwhile, if you have nothing to publish, you can find an article by someone, you can translate an article, etc., etc. But in a printed magazine dedicated to stories, you need to have stories. And so I was so desperate for stories that for the printed one, that I had to write one myself for each magazine. Otherwise, I wouldn't achieve the needed number of pages.
So what kind of themes did you start with writing? What kind of stories were you writing?
So I think at the beginning, it was very much about technology and, situation that technology can put you in, just like, classic science fiction. One thing I didn't mention is that I made a living in the software industry, right? I was programming computers since I was little. And so my mind was very much, the mind of an engineer, a software developer. And my concept of technology was, much influenced by that. And I think as time went by, I went more and more humane, let's call it, or literary, or whatever you choose to call it. It's like, I guess as a young boy reading science fiction, you start because, those are toys, right? Amazing toys, amazing robots and spaceships and, things shooting each other in the Martian night or whatever it is. But then it's like, okay, how much can you play with the toys, at some point, the really interesting stuff happens, and that's, in the mind. And also when the range of your reading, gets larger, gets bigger. You encounter writers like Philip K. Dick. That luckily for me was a lot of Philip K. Dick was translated into Hebrew back in the day. And so suddenly, Philip K. Dick, there's no real science in any of what Philip K. Dick wrote. And that's amazing. I love it. He's basically toying with the ideas of the genre for doing something completely different. Or if you can think about, do you remember The Stars My Destination by Bester? Right. So the premise of that novel is that people can teleport without a machine, right, by the power of the mind. And Bester takes, I remember encountering that book at the age of 16. It blew my mind. And by the way, it was translated by the same translator who passed away a week ago. His name is Emmanuel Lotem. And it blew my mind, right? Because right in the beginning, when he's talking about how this was discovered, the quality of people who can teleport themselves, he's basically saying to you, the reader, he's saying, this is not real. This is bullshit. I love it.
So you're writing Hebrew to begin with, I presume.
Oh, yeah, obviously. Yeah.
When did you start trying to write in English?
That took a long time. I think.
Since the book we're talking about is in English, I should make that clear.
So that Society for Science Fiction Fantasy that I mentioned, at some point, someone decided to have a project of translating Hebrew short fiction into English and publishing it in English language magazines. And that was the first time that a story of mine was translated. I'm trying to remember whether it was actually published anywhere. I don't remember. This was those were the times where you had to actually send, we're talking early 2000s, you had to send the actual printed paper directly to the magazine. And while this may be simple in the US or Canada, back in Israel, it meant you had to, physically go to the post office and stand in line and buy the very particular stamps that you have to put on a very particular envelope. And it's like, oh my God. So I did a lot of that. And gradually over the years, I was like, I could try writing in English myself. And now I write mostly in English. And I also find that I'm two different writers, like depending on the language.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I've talked to other writers who are bilingual and have written in both languages, and it's always fascinating to me. I had to take French because I live in Canada, but I certainly can't write in it or read it well enough. So I'm quite unilingual, but it always intrigues me because, and especially in the case of Hebrew, which has, it's not like European languages, which have some things in common. It goes much further back when the languages split off from each other. So does that, and apparently you're about to say it does influence the way that you write.
Yeah. So one thing, but that's I should stress that this is very personal, my trait. I don't think that all bilingual writers, feel the same or write the same. But I love the different kinds of Hebrew that you have. Not only current day modern Hebrew. I love biblical Hebrew. I love Hebrew. Hebrew was reinvented basically in the 19th century. So it served as a dead language, like a bit like Latin, I think, since the day of the temple and all of that. It wasn't the language you speak, on day-to-day matters. You spoke about it for matters of holiness, of the Bible, etc., etc. And then the 19th century, combined with the beginning of the whole, Zionist idea, etc., etc., there was a revival of the language. But it's not the same. You can very quickly detect a bit like the difference between modern English and, I don't know, Middle English,
or modern Greek and classical Greek.
You will know immediately, right? As a Hebrew reader, you know immediately what you're reading. So, but because it's so young, right? What is the 19th century? That's yesterday, as languages are concerned. So it changed rapidly since the initial reconception in 19th century to today's modern Hebrew. And I love using all those levels, even when I speak Hebrew. And in English, because it's not my native language, I find myself more limited. Many times I'll need to, seek out the particular word that I want. In Hebrew, for example, it's very easy for me to quote from the Bible. I'm no kind of believer, but as a cultural source, I think it's amazing. But in English, I'll have to go to the Bible and look for the translation of the particular verse that came to mind, and then it may not be the same because let me tell you, the King James, for example, is like, no, I would fire King James or whoever did it. Yeah, you're done with me.
Well, they were probably the best scholars they had at the time, but that was 500
Yeah,
years ago. So
yeah.
600 years ago, I guess now. So what was your first long work, your first novel-length work?
Well, that I guess depends how you would define it. So back in 2008, between 2007 and 09, Lavie and myself wrote two novels together. One of them in Hebrew and the other in English. The Hebrew one was a bit of a not so private joke. It was about a series of basically, it was an Israeli science fiction convention in which the famous Israeli science fiction writers get murdered one after the other. And the first person to get murdered is myself, very thinly veiled. And Lavie also has like a namesake in there. He's the nephew of the detective who investigates a case. We liked that thing. Some of the Israeli fandom liked it. For some of the Israeli fandom, it was a bit too close, maybe a bit below the belt, or however you say it. So that was one novel, and the other one is it's still actually available in Amazon. It's called the Tel Aviv Dossier. It's in English, and it's a post-apocalyptic, bizarre. Horror slash not exactly UFO, but novel, very weird novel happening in Tel Aviv. Basically, Tel Aviv is attacked by a supernatural phenomenon, very Lovecraftian, you could say. And the people in it, the city gets isolated from the rest of the country and the rest of the world, and the people in it, like divide themselves into groups according to whatever they did before. For example, the university people become like this semi-military organization in which the professors are the generals. All sorts of weird stuff. But it's about among other things, it's about belief, because everyone has their own theories of why the city was attacked, what is actually happening. And everyone are looking for a book called the Tel Aviv Dossier, which may explain it. And I think also belief is a recurring theme in not everything I write, but I'd say, I don't know, 50% of what I write. Because actually, after that, well, my first solo Hebrew novel came out a few years ago. It's called King of Jerusalem, and it's basically about the time-traveling King Solomon. And it has a lot to do with ancient Jewish folk tales and stories of the Bible. But there's a lot in it about the identity of God. Is there a God? Is there a God external to us or within us? Is the phenomena of God a part of the human psyche, etc., etc.? And now, The Good Soldier, that's my first English solo novel. So, I'm happy about that.
Well, that's what we should start talking about then. So maybe
Yeah.
the best place to start is by you giving a description of it without giving away anything you don't want to give away. Obviously, I know the book very well too. So
Yeah. And I'm happy about that. So it's a military sci-fi satirical novel. It's let's say in a far future, not so far future, a few hundred years from now, alternate history in which the world wars never occurred, and there's the empire, the almost universal empire of Earth is a tyranny, is like 1984 influenced or whatever dystopian book you'll choose to name. And on that background, there's the military navy of said empire, um, in a bitter war against the bugs or whatever they might be. And if you think to yourself, Starship Troopers, you're right. And then into the one of those spaceships in which most of the plot occurs, there's comes a new draftee, and this draftee is not as young as some would have hoped, and he's a self-proclaimed idiot, and everything starts unraveling from that point on. So it's basically, if you think about MASH meeting Starship Troopers.
yeah, that seems accurate. So what was the impetus for this? I mean, it's called The Good Soldier, and it is very much inspired by the classic Czech novel, The Good Soldier.
Sure.
How did that all come about? How did you end up choosing to pursue this as your first English language novel?
First, I think that as far as I'm concerned, choosing might be too strong a word. I think usually books happen to me, as opposed to me saying, "Oh no, I'm going to write about whatever." So I have a gazillion half stories, story opening, book openings, whatever it is, and sometimes something just catches in my mind, and I'm like, "Oh, this continues, and it continues, and I didn't get stuck, and oh, well, it's still working, and oh my God, look at that, I have a book, or a story, or whatever." It's the same with my music, by the way. Like, you see musical instruments behind me. That's also how I work on albums. I create also different tunes and music or whatever it is, and then sometimes I'll be like, I could do something else in the same style, and something else, and something else. So, I have an album. This one in particular. So I have a long love affair with The Good Soldier, Schweik, the Czech novel you mentioned. I remember reading it after, being in Israel. I spent 3 years in the army, in the Air Force, actually. And I remember reading that book. I encountered that book only after my service. And immediately, I read about this Schweik, who was also an idiot of sorts. Although I think much more calculated maybe than mine. I don't know. And I was like, this is me. This is basically how I felt serving. This is, I'm looking at commanders, and that book was written right after the First World War. So it didn't matter that, this one was the Austro-Hungarian Imperial Army, and I was in the Israeli Air Force in the 90s. It didn't matter the different names, the different foodstuffs, the different whatever. The general feeling of, being a soldier, being not in the fighting sense. I was no fighter. The feeling of being a part of that particular system, with all the nonsensical rules and the many nonsensical people, and how the system forces people to behave in a most unnatural and self-contradicting way. That feeling struck me. So I love that book. I read it every 4 or 5 years. I read it again. And then I remember reading a few years ago, going back to a bit of Robert Heinlein. Most of the stuff, most of his books I read as a teenager or even in primary school. And I went back to a few novels, among them Starship Troopers, and um, it got me angry. The book actually got me angry. Like, I like it, but despite myself, sort of. All those lectures and all that talk about having to serve in the army in order to be a citizen, as if that's the only good thing that can be done by a citizen, towards the state he lives in. Um, all this super right wing approach to me, uh, it doesn't sit well with me. And I said, what if I take this kind of orderly dystopian universe and put in it something that dismantles it? How does a rigid system, not only Heinlein system, but the system I know from my own service, how would it handle someone who is just so off axis that, like, what are you going to do? And that was the beginning of The Good Soldier.
Well, and you certainly got a lot of Heinlein references in there, using some of his book titles as titles of different books, entirely different books that you quote from at the beginning of each chapter. There's a lot of in-jokes for science fiction readers in there, for sure, which I guess kind of goes back to your first book about the Israeli science fiction scene. Yeah, so if you're a science fiction reader, you'll probably get things out of it that someone who hasn't read that same kind of Heinleinish oeuvre gets out of it. And I was a huge Heinlein reader. I read everything at about, I'm older than you, but I was reading it in sort of the same age range as well. So the book is humorous. How did you come up with the characters? That's something I often ask. Is like, you have a story you want to tell, you need characters. Your main character is kind of set because he's based on the good soldier, but there's a lot of other interesting characters in there. How do you go about assembling your cast and crafting your plot?
So I wanted to have characters because everything in the army is so, your identity, your rank and your position are such a big part of your identity in the army, the way I feel it, right? If you're a sergeant, you're a sergeant. It's something that transcends your, I don't know, name and your whatever race or gender or whatever. The way I felt, at least, that's my feeling, right? Don't. And so I wanted to have people of different positions and different ranks and different tasks. And it was also important to me to criticize not only the army, but basically every system of government that is too tyrannical, in my opinion. So this is also very much against, let's say, communism. I'm not talking about what Americans call communism. I'm talking about, Stalin, the good old Stalin days, and the Chinese Communist Party. So that's, for example, why I have a political officer. Political officers were common in the Russian army. Maybe they're still there. I don't know. Called zampolit, I think, or something like that. And they were there basically to make sure that whoever, all the other soldiers, including high rank officers, behave according to what the party says, which is insane, which is absolutely insane. If you need to fix a machine, there is no party approved way of fixing a machine. You just need to fix it. So that's how Commander Kapust came to life. Kapust, by the way, is cabbage in Russian.
There's a lot of wordplay in your names, and
there's there's a lot of that. So some of the officers came, some of the characters came out that way. Other characters are spoofs on Heinlein again. Like you have Johnny and Daisy, just like you had in Starship Troopers. You have Sergeant Zimmer. I remember you had Sergeant Zim at Heinlein. A totally different character, by the way, if you remember both novels. So some of them are such spoofs. And a few of them, especially the engine, the people who deal with the ship's engine towards the last third of the novel, are just people I knew. People I knew in my service as a technician in the Air Force. Technicians are really a special breed, let's say. So I just took, the names mean nothing. Of course, the names are totally different, but the people are real. So that's basically the cast of characters.
And you said that you kind of work on things, and pretty soon you have an album or you have a book. That sounds like perhaps you're not someone who does a detailed outline before you begin writing the book. Does it kind of just coalesce as you go along?
I mean, the moment I write a detailed, I'm trying, every time I try to write a detailed outline, the book will not happen, or the story, or whatever it is. Like, I have a feeling in my mind that I already wrote it and it's done and bye-bye. I don't know. That's a problem of mine, I guess, but what can you do? However, I usually know in my head the big points of the story. And if I do not know where I'm going to, I cannot write. I can stare at the blank page all day. I have to know, but I don't plot it really in advance. Many times, by the way, the idea for a novel or a story will be the end, and then I'll actually have to find a beginning.
Do you have to do a lot of revision after you get to the end of the first draft? Is there a lot of rewriting involved?
Not really. The one major change that I did make was actually, remember mentioning that I open each chapter with a small fictional work, which is entitled after a Robert Heinlein novel. So that actually was after the first draft. That's the big change between the two drafts.
I think it was an important addition. I think it was an important addition. I think it really adds something to the book.
I agree. I'm happy it occurred to me, but that was because I realized the universe had to be more defined, because kind of felt isolated without it. Like, who are these people? Why are they fighting? What is going on? So those openings let me define it better without getting into long info dumps. I thought it was a funnier way to do it.
Of course, the book comes out on January 23rd, which will be, 2 days after this goes live, if it goes live when I expect it to, which is exciting. Now, it's interesting for me because it came to me as a result of doing the podcast, because I interviewed Lavie on here in the old, not the video version, in the audio version. And I had put out something to my guests on the podcast. I mentioned that I had Shadowpaw Press and I was open to, new work. And he said, well, I know this novel by this guy, basically. And here we are. So that was very exciting for me. And it's been great fun for me to do the editing and see the whole thing come together. So I'm really looking forward to releasing it. What do you hope the response will be? You've had some good reviews already.
Yeah, I saw some good reviews, and I also saw some not so good
There
reviews,
was
which
one,
are
yeah.
actually hugely entertaining, I think, um, because I love it that people put with the good reviews. Usually, they're good, they're fun. The bad reviews are heartfelt. You can see that the person is really mad. And that's another thing I learned in the army. I learned how to make people mad, really, how to make people spit.
As your
Uh,
character does in
as
in the book.
yeah, totally. And by the way, this reminds me, for example, some of the incidents in the novel, right? Mayhem in the airlock, cooking accident in zero gravity, whatever. So sure, it didn't happen to me in the Israeli Air Force. We don't have zero gravity, we don't have spaceships, and we don't have airlocks. But I saw my fair share of cooking accident, and I saw you wouldn't believe the stuff that can be done with a tin can, especially when you try to open it by riding over it with a jeep. I kid you not. Um, or putting stuff in the fire that shouldn't be put in the fire. Um, Dealing with all sort of hazardous material without being like, okay, sure, yeah, let's just um so so some of those incidents are just science fiction versions of events that actually happened to me or to my to other soldiers in my unit.
So do you think it will resonate with people who have some of your with military experience as well as people who don't have military experience?
Well, that's what I hope. I mean, I didn't write it for people who were in the military. Many of them may not agree with me because I don't know, their political views are different. Their opinion of the army is different. I spent only 3 years in the army. Maybe someone who spent 20 years in the army has another perspective. But I do hope it will entertain them, and I think that also science fiction fans who like, maybe some of the younger ones who like military science fiction without perhaps the full attention to what it implies. I hope to entertain them and maybe make them think a bit about the books they've read previously.
And if people would like to keep track of you and the other things you do, because as we can see, and as you mentioned, you're a musician and a filmmaker and various other creative activities as well, where can people keep up with you online?
Well, the main place would be just my website, niryaniv.com. That's kind of easy. I've created several short films and music videos, like animated and half animated. Um, and actually, some of them Lavie Tidhar wrote. We recently released a short film called Loontown, which is a film noir, an 18 minutes long film noir, in which all the characters are balloons. So you have a balloon detective and a balloon femme fatale and a balloon policeman and whatever it is. And I think it's really funny. And it's out there. It's free. It did a festival round and now it's free. Um, and we have a website for that, actually. I mean, you can find it through my website as well, but we have a website for it. It's called positronish.com. Like, remember Asimov's
Yes.
positronic brain? So positronish may be a bit more Jewy version of that. Um, yeah, we have that.
And I should mention, of course, although I will also in the intro and the outro, that you can come to Shadowpaw Press, shadowpawpress.com. There's a page for the book there. And of course, it will be widely available everywhere on January 23rd in ebook and print, and have some feelers out for audiobooks. Well, it would be nice if I could make that happen. So we'll see if that happens. But I'm very much looking forward to its release. I hope you are too.
I'm very grateful I think you did an excellent job in editing it. Having been both a writer and an editor, I know how it is to be on both sides, and I really appreciate dealing with someone as stubborn as myself. That shows character strength.
Well, you're welcome. Okay, well, thanks so much for being on, and the book is coming out almost right away, so
yeah,
I'm hoping for great things for it.
Check it out, people. Check it out.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
And thanks again to Nir for that great conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. Just a few housekeeping details to finish off with here. You can find The Worldshapers online at theworldshapers.com. You can find it on Facebook at The Worldshapers, and you can find it on X at The Worldshapers. You can find me, which I'm sure you want to, at edwardwillett.com. 2 T's on Willett, also 2 L's in Willett. You can find me on X at ewillett. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor, and you can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. And you can find Shadowpaw Press, my publishing company, at shadowpawpress.com, on X at Shadowpaw Press, and on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. Now, you may be watching this video on my YouTube channel, but if you're not, I would urge you to check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. In addition to every episode of the new video format of The Worldshapers, I regularly take walks around my home city of Regina, Saskatchewan, and you can walk with me while I blather on about this and that, usually something about writing and publishing and just what I see as I walk around Regina. It's a lot of fun, and I hope that you might check it out and take a walk with me one of these days. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I'll be back next week with Mark Morton, I believe, is my next guest. He's the author of The Headmasters, coming out very soon, also from Shadowpaw Press. But I'm already lining up other authors going forward. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot more talk on here with a lot more authors about a lot more books, and I hope you'll come back and watch. That's it for this episode.